Morning everyone, Ryan from Amphora Data here. Today I'm going to show you how you can create your own dashboard and alerting system using Amphora Glaze and GitHub Actions. Let's get into it. Okay, so for this example, we're going to use a dashboard that I've created previously. So the reason I built this dashboard is because my mom is an avid gardener and she lives in Albury-Wodonga. And in Albury-Wodonga, the temperatures get really high and they get really low. And when that happens, you need to react to those situations. If the temperature is really hot, you need to water the plants. If the temperature is really cold, you need to protect small seedlings from frost. So what I've built here is just very basic dashboard connected up to some Amphora. And this is weather observations for the past day and weather forecasts for the upcoming day. And what we want to do is we want to be able to react to these changes in data and hopefully alert when we get data that's outside of a particular threshold. So we can see this is for tomorrow, the temperature is going up to 15 and down to 6 supposedly. And we can see also for the last week, the temperature going up and down. But what we really want to do is we want to run a job that every day checks whether the forecast for tomorrow is outside of some particular bounds. And we also want to check whether historically we've been outside bounds as well, because maybe our forecasts were wrong, or maybe there was a frost overnight and we need to go out in the morning and protect our plants. You can actually see this here, the air temperature is going down to just above 0 here and actually below 0 earlier on in the week. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Python to automatically check for these thresholds. And then if we ever detect stuff going out of the threshold, then we're going to create a file in an Amphora. And we're going to use those files to represent alerts. So this is some Python code I've written earlier. You can see this on the samples repository. But you can see I've got some methods here that basically checks for a maximum and alert if we're above the maximum. And similarly here, we're going to check for a minimum and alert if we're in the minimum. And then all we're going to do is we're going to get the ranges that we care about. So for the forecast range, I just care about tomorrow. And for the observations range, I care about yesterday. Then I'm going to go ahead and pull the data using the Amphora Data client, Python client. So it's quite simple. Let me zoom in for you here so you can see it. Get rid of this guy. Whoop. We use the Amphora client to get a reference to our Amphora. And then we just use the get signals and then pull method. We pass in our forecast range, whether we want to include the right time and the kind of API we want to use. Here I'm just using get events, which means I want the raw data as opposed to any kind of averaging or smoothing. And then I'm going to use this helper function at the end here called to pandas. And what that's going to give me is a data frame of my weather forecasts. Going to do exactly the same thing here for my weather observations. And then now we've got this data, it's represented in pandas. Now we can do some, in this case, relatively simple analytics. So I'm going to get the forecast temperatures and the temperature observations just by using this indexing method on the data frames. And then I'm going to call my check maximum and minimum alerting functions. All we're really doing here is checking whether any of these numbers for the past day or day upcoming is either going to be more or less than these particular thresholds. Now, I can set my thresholds here in this constants file. What I'm really going to do is I'm just going to set these thresholds to 20 and 10. Now, I know these are not exactly thresholds that you would actually care about, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I actually want these alerts to fire, and so I'm going to have relatively low thresholds. In fact, let's make that 15 to see what happens. I can show you these methods as well. They're quite simple. You just get the maximum. If the maximum is greater than our threshold, then we're going to calculate the mean time that these temperatures were above the threshold, and then we're going to call this alert method. And all the alert method does is creates a file and writes some text to the file and then uploads the file. So these files represent alerts there's got the name of the file, which says it's either a high temperature or a low temperature, and then we'll write some useful message into the file. In this case, I'm going to say, the value was maximum at approximately this time, and also just a little helpful message here, a low temperature has been forecast. Okay, so what does this look like? So I can see, upcoming, we've got temperature of, a low of 5, so this should trigger an alert for us. And I can also see in the past, an air temperature here of 17.8. That should be less than our constants over here. So we should get some alerts triggered. Oh, I should also mention that what I'm doing here is I'm saving these files to this Amphora. I've called just my insights Amphora. And this is just going to be a container for my alerts and for any other kind of derived information I'm getting from my weather data. So I'm going to go ahead and run this job. You can see I've got some files here. I've got my outliers.py and my constant.py. And I'm going to go ahead and pass in my username and password firstly. Under type. Just save my password to a variable for you all so you can't see it. And I'm going to call outliers.py. That's going to go ahead and download the data into a pandas data frame. It's also going to give us some small number of descriptions, and I can see now my alerts are firing. So I've got an alert for a high value recorded, an alert for another high value observed, and also 2 alerts for the low temperatures. If I go ahead and have a look at this Amphora on our web app and refresh this page, you'll see all of these alerts now starting to fire. Okay, so I've got a Python file. It's a job that I can obviously schedule to do periodically. I'm going to do that in GitHub Actions in a moment. But what I really want to do is I want these alerts, these files, to show up in our dashboard. If I go back to my dashboard, I think it'd be really great to have these alerts showing up below these graphs. So how do we do that? Basically what we're going to do is we're going to use some pre-made components from the React Amphora library. And I'm going to do that inside this dashboard component over here. So I'll quickly show you this dashboard component. It's not particularly complicated. I've just got a bunch of standard JSON objects here, just saying, I want my weather observation data to come from Albury Airport, and these are the kind of properties I want. And also I want my forecast data to come from Albury, and this is the ID of the Amphora, and these are the properties that I want. So just some definitions. Down here I've got this chart section component, which I've just created. And what we've got here is simply, it's got a name, and then we're going to use this ensure purchased component to make sure that the person viewing the dashboard has access to the underlying data. And then if we do, we're going to render this signals chart component, which basically just renders a graph of the data that we care about. And then I'm going to do this in my dashboard component, where I've just got a couple of chart sections. This is exactly what we're seeing here at the moment. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a component below these where we're going to show some files, and for those files, we're going to be able to click on them and then display what's inside. So firstly, I'm just going to write a little bit of bootstrapping code where I'm going to grab my ID of my insights Amphora. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a stateful component by using the React hook react.useState. So now what this is saying is I want to have some state in my component. The state is going to be this alert file constant, and then I've got a method here, select file, which lets me say which is the file that we've selected. Now, once we've done this, we're going to add a new row below here. So I'm using Bootstrap just for some very basic layouts. I'm going to have a new div, a new row. And let's have two columns here. We can have on the left-hand column a place where we can view any alerts that have happened, also known as files. And then if we click on those, we'll use our select file method to then change the state of the component and then render that file on the left-hand side. So firstly, I'm going to use the ensure purchased component again. And the reason we split this up is because in React, we always want to prefer composition to any kind of inheritance. But we also want to make sure that the person viewing this does actually have access to this Insights Amphora. Potentially what we might be doing here is we might be outsourcing this analytics to a third-party company, and part of the way that they're getting paid is by people consuming those insights. And so to get access to these insights, in this case, alerts on temperature anomalies, there might have been some financial transaction that's occurred here. So the ensure purchase component is relatively simple. We just give it an Amphora ID, and it's the insights ID that I care about. And in fact, I'm going to do the same thing when I render the file itself. And then inside here, I'm going to use this component called a file list, which I'm going to need to import. So let's import the things we need. We need the file list component, and we also need the file renderer component for rendering our files in a moment. Okay, so in my file list component, again, I also need to give it an Amphora ID, which is our insights ID. Secondly, we need to tell it what to do when you click on the Amphora. So I'm going to use this onFileClick method here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the file, of course. So I'm just going to call my select file method. And this actually needs the file name. And we'll pass in the file name into our select file method. Now what that's going to do is when I now click on the file, we're going to set the state of the component. Then what we need to do is on our right-hand side, once we select the file that we care about, now we need to render the contents of that file. So I'm going to use another component called the file renderer component to select that file. So to render that file, I should say. Got my file renderer component. It also needs an Amphora ID. So I'm going to pass in the insights ID again. And we're also going to need the file name. Now in this case, the file name is going to be the state that we said. So the file we want to render is the alert file. But we need to be careful here that we don't pass in something that's null. Alert file might not have been selected. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make this conditional by checking first whether alert file is truthy. And if it is, then we're going to render this file renderer. Just going to do some, MIME type, of course. So there's many different kinds of files you might want to render. In this case, it's just a text file. So I'm going to set MIME type to be text plain. And this way, the file renderer knows how to render it. What I'm also going to do, just very quickly, is just add a little heading here. Also alert file, just so you can see exactly what we've selected. Okay, so just to recap, what I've done is I've added a list of files here, connected up to the Amphora where we were publishing our insights, and I've also added a file renderer that conditionally renders the contents of those files when we click them. Great. So I've got this running over here. You can see here I've just used yarn start to just spin up a local server on my development environment. Now what I should be able to do is, of course, right in the middle. There we go. Temporary error, probably because I'm doing too much development work with too many different apps. Okay, so now we've signed in to our application. If you want to learn how to sign in to your applications using the Amphora identity system, there's a few good tutorials I've got up online. I definitely recommend using this one, which is in the samples repository. Skipping over that, we've signed in using our magic sign in button. And now I can, using this view dashboard button, just head to the dashboard that we've already created. Now, I can see what's happened. Great. I can see the files that I actually just created. Now what I can do is I can just click on one of these files, and then on the right hand side, now we're going to render the contents of these files. Now that was pretty fast. And what I've done is I've actually connected up my insights generating code into my front end. But then also, because this is all available through the Amphora Data API, now anybody with access to this Amphora can now start tapping off these insights and doing whatever kind of custom logic they want to do. So this is kind of where we're going to leave it for now. If you go on to the GitHub repository, you'll see how I have created a GitHub action that will every day schedule this outliers job. So we'll be generating these alerts every day. I don't have to do anything manually. And you can also go there and you can see this is deployed. I've actually deployed this using Netlify, which is a pretty great little tool. You can see this is what's deployed at the moment. I'll deploy this just after this and you'll be able to see these insights being generated. And if you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer questions. And honestly, if you want to build your own cool dashboards, absolutely happy to help. Please hit me up.